let's go to interior defensive player of the year, which is going to be our defensive player of the year. I'm sure you have Victor Wembenyama. I also have Victor Wembenyama. Is there anybody else that you wanted to shout out, though?
Yeah, I think that Jaren Jackson Jr. probably deserves praise. And this is a guy who I've actually never quite been as high on, I think, as others. Like, I did not pick him to be defensive player of the year when I believe he won it a couple of years ago. But he seems a little bit better, a little more reliable this year. He's not fouling as much, although I say that, and he did have a game where he had 6 fouls in the fourth quarter, and he went from 0 to fouled out in the span of like 10 gameplay minutes, which was pretty astonishing. But he's like anchoring a Grizzlies lineups that are really solid defensively, like 88th percentile defensively, and there's not that much defensive talent on the Grizzlies. Like, I think Taylor Jenkins and his staff are very underrated defensive technicians, but you look at the Grizzlies and it's a bunch of guys who are like varying shades of okay to bad, except for Marcus Smart, who's missed more than half the year, and Scottie Pippen, who is their backup point guard, and despite it all, like, the Grizzlies are hard to score on, and that's almost entirely due to Jaren Jackson Jr. So I think he deserves like heavy consideration for second place.
We might have to, like, we're making all these new defensive player of the year awards over the next few years. We actually might need to do like a silver medal for defensive player of the year, because it's going to be tough. Victor Wembanyama is the runaway here. I can't imagine a world where he doesn't get it. We don't need to explain Victor Wembanyama to our listener. Like, this is an audience that very much understands the impact of Victor Wembanyama. I will say this, though. I have this one stat. The difference between Wembanyama's total blocks this season, he's got 137, and second place, Walker Kessler at 80. That's the difference between Walker Kessler's blocks and Anthony Black, who has the 81st most blocks in the league. That's the difference between Wembanyama at 1 and Walker Kessler at 2. The difference between Wembanyama and Walker Kessler is the equivalent defensively of Walker Kessler to Anthony Black. That's what we're talking about. It's insane.
That's crazy. I have a very similar stat that was second quarter specific, that Wembanyama had 69 blocks in the quarter, and second place Miles Turner had 39, even though Wembanyama played 16 games and Turner played 19. So, he's just doing stuff we literally have not seen in decades, and maybe ever when you can compare it to the relative averages, right? So, you could talk about Wembanyama for forever, but I feel like we're just going to have years and years to do so. So why waste people's time now?
Well, you brought up the history of it. So with what he's doing this year, I wanted to ask you, and I understand I'm just sort of bringing this on you in surprise, but would he beat like the last how many defensive player of the year winners? Like, I went back and looked at like the defensive player of the years, and I asked, okay, just kind of time machine, transport Victor Wembanyama back. Would he beat that defensive player of the year for defensive player of the year that season? So you look at it last year, it's Rudy Gobert. You can start there. Like, do you think that Wembanyama, with the season that he's having, because it's even better than the season he had as a rookie, do you think he beats Rudy Gobert last year? I do.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the list right now. So definitely beats him last year, I think, without question.
Jaren Jackson 2 years ago? Yep.
I already said I wouldn't have voted for Jaren Jackson that year. So
yep, exactly. Marcus Smart the year before that, I think absolutely. Marcus Smart stole that from Bam anyway, but we don't have to have that conversation now. Rudy Gobert in 2020, 2021. It's really hard to kind of separate all the Rudy Gobert seasons. He's won 4 defensive player of the years, but I think he probably beats him that last year in Utah. I kind of remember that sort of being like let's just kind of give it to Gobert again.
Yeah. It was like him versus Draymond, but neither of them were really like, going all out for it, from what I remember.
Giannis, the year you won MVP and Defensive Player of the Year, I think Wemby beats Giannis, but there was a big narrative sort of push to get it to Giannis that year. First guy since MJ, all that kind of stuff. But I think Wemby would have beat him that year.
Yeah, for sure.
So this is where I ended up. I have him also beating Gobert in 2018-19. I looked at the stats for Gobert, his first Defensive Player of the Year in 2017-18. He was dominant, anchored the number 1 defense in the league in Utah. Was it number 1? I have it written down. Maybe it was number 2. But an elite defense. It was the number 1. Sorry. Number 1 defense in the league by a mile in Utah in 2018. His rim protection stats were insane. It was the first Rudy Gobert Defensive Player of the Year award that you could argue kind of won him several more Defensive Player of the Years. Not to say he wasn't deserving after that, but it really established himself as the most dominant rim protecting force in the league for basically half a decade after that. So Gobert could have won it then. Maybe there's still an argument for Victor Wembanyama when you look at his numbers, though. What he's doing this year, like, you could still transport, and by the way, if you transported Wembenyama to 2018, I think all of our brains would have exploded. But the last guy I have it who I think would have gotten it over Victor Wembenyama this year, Draymond Green for the 2017 Golden State Warriors, the number 2 rated Warriors defense, the best Warriors defense, I think, of that era. And Draymond was just sensational. All the advanced stats bear it out. He was holding opponents to a worse shooting percentage than even Wembenyama is this year. He was so dominant, switching 1 through 5. Just, again, the anchor to one of the great teams we had seen. So I think Draymond would have gotten it in 2017. But that's how far back you have to go before Victor Wembanyama wouldn't have won it in a time machine.
Yeah, and just doing a cursory glance through some stuff, that first Gobert win in 17-18 was pretty remarkable from what I remember and what I'm glancing at now too. So that would, like, the thing about Wembanyama that's so crazy is, like, and people have said this online, that, like, there's so many times he makes mistakes, right? Like, you see them happening in real time. You're like, oh, like, you could have contested that, but you didn't. Or, like, where are you on this pick and roll? Like, he's not technically that proficient yet. Like, good, right, but not great. And, like, prime Gobert never made a mistake. He didn't have the physical tools that Wembanyama has now, but he has significant physical tools, and he just never made a mistake on a Jazz team that had very little defensive help around him, even at their best, you know? So I would definitely be sympathetic to the argument that one or two of those earlier Gobert wins would have still held up now. I am not convinced that there will be defensive seasons that will have ever been better than what we will see from Wembanyama in, like, 2 years. He just needs a little more experience.
Well, that brings me to my next historical data point here for Victor Wembanyama. So there's been 3 players who have won 4 Defensive Player of the Year awards. Nobody has ever won more. Dikembe Mutombo's got 4, Ben Wallace, Rudy Gobert. That's the group. Victor Wembanyama, if he wins it this year, which we expect him to, he's going to have his first Defensive Player of the Year award at 21 years old. Mutombo didn't win his first DPOY until he was 28. Ben Wallace didn't win his first until he was 27. Rudy Gobert, he was in his 5th season when he won at 25 years old. So Victor Wembanyama is going to have won his first Defensive Player of the Year, presumably, by at least 4 years before anybody else on that list, and 7 years before Mutombo did, in terms of age. And so my only question is, how many is he going to win? Like, he could be part of the 4-timers club by the time Rudy Gobert won his first by 25 years old. That is a real thing here. That's what we're talking about in terms of the context of what Victor Wembanyama is doing and how young he is doing it.
Yeah, and listen, he's going to put voter fatigue to the test pretty quick. People are going to be falling over backwards to find reasons to give it to somebody. Like, I mean, it's been... I kind of think the Marcus Smart thing was a little bit of a pushback to, like, hey, guards can't be the winner here. Like why can't a point of attack defender win Defensive Player of the Year? And he won it. And I think people were sick of Gobert had won it 3 of the previous 4, I think. And Giannis, not the exact same role, but still a big man defender, right? And people wanted to reward Marcus Smart for all of his, like, hustle stuff or whatever instead of giving it to Bam. And I do think we're going to get that a couple of times with Wembanyama too. But at some point, the numbers are going to be so overwhelming that it doesn't even matter if they're supposed to be directional or not. They're going to be pretty crystal clear. So,
yeah, when you try to sort of predict the voter fatigue narrative 3 or 4 years from now, when he is vying to become the 4th member of the 4-timer club, it's that. I think it could be a little bit like, yeah, we don't give enough shine to the perimeter defenders. It's time somebody on the perimeter should win, which is a fair argument. I'm okay with it. But also, what if the Spurs don't kind of get better as a team overall, which seems hard to fathom right now, but they're far away from being like a real true blue contender, even at this point, even as when you sort of project forward for what Victor Wembanyama is going to be. So if they hit some sort of roadblock, Stephon Castle isn't one. I'm a big Castle fan, but if he doesn't pan out for whatever reason, like these next draft picks don't pan out, they never make that big move, and they're still just sort of in the middle. You can make there will be some voters that say, you know what, I'm just not comfortable giving Defensive Player of the Year again to a guy who's on the 9th best defense in the league for a team that's like the 6th seed in the West. Maybe that's something too. I mean, people come up with their reasons.